Friends, good evening. Thank you for joining us another lecture in our pre-chamber series. Let's go ahead and have a conversation tonight on the subject matter of the sun, the universe, and the Solioonensius. We have a series of laws that govern our universe. And these laws are a series of cosmic universal principles. We may speak about laws when Samael refers to the tree of life, and he will say, at the very crown where we have the realm of the archetypes, that is governed by 3 laws. But as we descend into the realm of the innermost, that is governed by 6. When we get into the mental plane, that is governed by 12, the astral plane by 24. The vital and the physical planes are governed by 48. And Samael says this, and the typical question that we get is, can you list what those laws are? We want to know what those laws are. And we have to comprehend that these laws are intelligent principles. These laws are combinations of wisdom and knowledge, and they are the necessary and sufficient to govern, regulate, and maintain the order of all the activities that take place within that specific realm of the universe. Yes, we go through a lecture in which we speak about cosmic laws. And beyond those that we share, yes, there are more, because here we are governed by 48. And as we descend into the inferior realms of creation, well, we end up finding more. So in terms of what we are discussing tonight, this law of the Solioonensius is one of those cosmic universal principles. And I'm going to ask of you to put aside what you have learned and to open your heart and open your mind to that which is new. Starting here with the subject matter of the universe. It has been written that the house of my father has many rooms. And this is what the universe is. For those of you who have already penetrated into the intermediate and the advanced levels, we have already seen and have conversations about the work on the 3 mountains that Samael speaks of in his book that is actually titled The 3 Mountains. And we have seen how the work of the first mountain has to do with the rising of 7 serpents of fire. This is working on creating superior existential bodies. It has to do with receiving superior principles that are exclusive to the innermost, so that the consciousness can become liberated, and that as a consequence, we can then manifest virtues, faculties, powers, laws, that all of them together end up making up what is known as a radiant solar soul. And then the work of the second mountain, as we have penetrated into the deeper study, well, Samael says we have to first conquer the moon, and we have to develop a psychological moon. And after we do that, we also have to crystallize within our own psychology a psychological solar system. Many students go, what? What does that even mean? Well, that means that once the master has risen 7 serpents of fire, well, there is still more work that has to be done. And now that he is an adept, a master, he has to become a master of perfection. And beyond a master of perfection, he has to become a perfect master. So now that the 7 serpents of fire have been developed, now he has to work with 7 serpents of light. And in terms of these many rooms in the house of my father, well, the master has to penetrate in the inferior realms of the moon so that he can eliminate all of the empty caskets of what is left of his ego. And by doing that, he conquers the heaven of the moon. And then he has to descend into the infernos of Mercury. And once he does that, well, then he can conquer the heavens of Mercury. And so with Venus and Mars and Jupiter and Saturn, etc. This is part of what this picture is representing for us. Once that work is done, Samael says, well, only for the greatest masters, then they integrate their own psychological galaxy. Wow. Now, how many galaxies are not there in the known universe? And when we speak of galaxies and galaxy clusters and super clusters of galaxies, well, we know that there is a primary intelligence behind every one of them. So this work, yes, this work is tremendous. It is marvelous, glorious. And of course, as we look into the horizon, we see no end, but it doesn't matter. That is perfectly fine. Because these are all activities that happen within the eternity, beyond time. And they all happen in spaces that exist beyond the eternity itself. And this is some of that glorious beauty of gnosis. So this is just the picture of the universe. And when it comes to the galaxy, well, then let's start narrowing this thing down. Because every organism gravitates around a nucleus. We know this to be true in the atom. The atom is stable because all of the electrons, which are the electrical charges that can be shared, well, they all gravitate on a common core, that common nucleus. And beyond the atom, as we grow into more complex systems like a cell, well, we also know that the cell has a nucleus. As that continues to grow and we see an even more complex organism like that of a human being, we know that everything gravitates around the heart. And the same we can say about the solar system. The planets gravitate around the sun, and the galaxy being a combination of constellations, solar systems, wandering planets, black holes, dark matter, etc. Well, everything in the galaxy gravitates around its own central sun. And that central sun is Sirius B. As we look on the internet, for those of you who are very inquisitive and who would like to satisfy all of that intellectual appetite, well, it is a combination of suns. That is what they tell us. But should we get stuck in that? We open ourselves to that which is new. And let us tell you this, just like Samael, back in the 1950s, openly stated the Earth has two moons. It has our regular moon, the one that we all see, and it has another smaller moon that through a telescope it looks and appears to be the size of a lentil. And it was not until the year 2006, 2008, where we come to see that there is an open disclosure of this other body that has been orbiting the Earth. And it is indeed, well, a dark moon. It is Lilith. But it is something that finally science was able to catch up with this millenary wisdom. So now that we're speaking about the central sun of the galaxy, the name of that sun is Solioonensius. And this name that our galaxy has, this Milky Way, is a name of Greek origin. And we see that this milky statement exists there. And we immediately remember that there are many writings that speak about greater times, of greater humanities, where everything was harmony, everything was compassion, manifestations of love, harmony with the universe, equanimity with the being and amongst human beings. And that at those times, rivers flowed honey and, of course, milk. This is an indication of wisdom. It is an indication, of course, of a teaching that nourishes, that can give us the ability for us to assimilate it, to integrate it, to grow with it. And when we contemplate our Milky Way, well, we know that the size of our galaxy is unfathomable to the mind. You know, it is of hundreds of thousands of light years in distance. And some people say, what do you mean light year? How can a year be representative of distance? And what we say is, well, when we look at the speed with which light travels, and we know that it can take us from here to Mars something like 180 days traveling nonstop to be able to get there, perhaps even more, and that a radio wave gets there in 5 minutes. Well, that gives us a good feel for what this light year distance means. Because the light from the sun gets onto the earth in roughly 8 minutes. So if the light from the sun gets here in 8 minutes, and we know that the sun is so terribly far away from our earth, when we speak of hundreds of thousands of light years to go from one side of the Milky Way to another, well, that certainly should give us a shock. Either shock us or leave us in awe about how magnificent is this group of bodies that interact with each other, that fuse themselves with each other, that maintain this particular balance. We're speaking about 50 million suns. Actually, 50 million suns sounds like such a ridiculously low number. We're speaking about hundreds of thousands of perhaps millions of suns. And yet, the galaxy itself is governed by the law of three. As we penetrate into the realm of the galaxy, that galaxy is contained within three specific laws. And these three primary forces are what give origin to everything that has been created. But there is a Buddhist teaching that says things are made of not things. So we may look at a picture of a galaxy and we may say, a galaxy. But the fact is that the galaxy is made of non-galaxy things. As we approach the galaxy, well, we see that it is made of solar systems, constellations, wandering planets, dark matter, black holes, supermassive black holes, and so many other things. And when we focus on a single constellation, whether it is your favorite constellation that is associated to your zodiacal sign, Aries or Taurus or Gemini or Cancer, Libra, Virgo, etc. Every galaxy exists and gravitates around a specific nucleus that keeps everything bound together. And on the many galaxies that exist in the solar system, in the Milky Way, the constellation of the Pleiades is of great importance to us. Because our sun is one of the 7 suns that make up the constellation of the Pleiades. The Aztecs used to refer to these other suns, these sisters, as cabrillas, and they based the stone of the sun, which is a calendar that has been chiseled in stone, based on cycles of 52 years, and all of that was based on celestial mechanics and the mathematics around the Pleiades. Every 52 years, the Aztecs celebrated a very profound ritual. And every 52 years, they would come together and they will destroy all of their ceramic containers. Each and every vase that they had, they would tear it apart. They would smash it and break it. And they would create new ones. And they did this so that they would have a symbol of that which is new. The great Master Jesus brings forth the very same teaching when he celebrates his first miracle at the weddings of Cana. And when they run out of wine, the first thing that he says, once he embarks to just exercise the transmutation of that water into the wine of the Spirit, he says, get new containers. Even in his lecture, Samael Veor, when he speaks about changing our way of thinking, he says, we cannot put anything new in a container that is stained with all of our old stuff. He says, you do not pour new wine into an old container because you contaminate the wine. And in the same way, they would destroy each and every vase as a symbol of everyone opening themselves to that which is new. So we are part of this constellation of the Pleiades. And the Pleiades, just like the galaxy has its own central sun, and every constellation has its own, well, the Pleiades have their own central sun, and that is known as the central sun of Alcyone. And we have already learned in some of our previous lectures that as our solar system completes a sidereal year, that means that as it travels under each and every one of the constellations of the zodiac and completes a whole orbit, that sidereal year that would last something close to 26,000 years. Some people say 25,968 with fractions of this and that. Well, fine. Close to 26,000 years. We will have then the opportunity to see our solar system entering the rings of Alcyone. And that ring that is known as a photonic belt, however, there are no photons there. Samael tells us what happens with the sun of Alcyone is something very peculiar, because what we see is that the electron disintegrates, and the disintegration of the electron creates this ring that is not a ring of powder and dust and particles, as is the ring of Saturn. What we see then is a band of energy that is referred to as a manasic belt. And manas in theosophy means the mind. As our solar system approaches and enters this manasic belt, it would receive this particular energy. And the energy will be very useful for those who can receive that extra dose of energy and apply it into their internal work. Because this energy will help accelerate the progress. Those who rebel against this energy, who suddenly find themselves overwhelmed and they fall on their knees because they are fighting everything that is happening around them, well, Samael says those who do not make good use of this energy will precipitate themselves into the abyss faster. And yes, we do anticipate that there will be some changes. And there will be changes that will be geophysical, that something will happen on the planet. And because we are on the outermost layer of the planet itself, well, certainly something will happen to this organic layer and everything that governs it. And Samael says some new illnesses will emerge and the Iliaster will come into life, and we will see new species that had long been forgotten. Creatures that had been considered to be extinct will once again emerge, and well, we will see that what we know of biology and chemistry, well, much of that will become obsolete. And these new energies will require and invite new discoveries and certainly new learnings. And this happens because we are part of the constellation of the Pleiades. But then in our solar system, this is a solar system that contains perhaps more bodies than what you would anticipate. By the time that we all went to school, we know that we learned that the solar system was made of 9 planets. And in the early 2000s, there was a conversation about Pluto. And some argument, well, Pluto is too small and maybe it should not be a planet. And then even a decision was made to leave Pluto out of the list of planets. But in reality, if we consider that in its origin the word planet means a wanderer through space, then we can see that our solar system is in reality made up of 12 planets plus the sun. We have 13 cosmic units in our solar system. Just as there are 13 units in the tree of life, and beyond the tree of life, those three forces that are known as the Ein Sof Aur, the Ein Sof, and the Ein, the ray of creation, the unmanifested abstract space, and the uncreated light. There are all of these planets, inclusive of Clarion, Vulcan, and Persephone. 12 units, 9 planets that you already know, and Clarion, Vulcan, and Persephone. And this is something that is important that we know it. Because this number 13, as it appears in the number of cosmic bodies in our solar system, and as it appears in the Kabbalistic tradition, it is an indication of an end, of a transformation. It is telling us that the existence in this solar system for each one of us as we emerge through waves of monads, well, it is defined, and it has at some point a chronological end when it comes to inhabiting the solar system to eventually transition into somewhere else. So just like there are monads that exist within our body, governed by a principal monad, that is your consciousness, well, the same thing happens within the solar system as well. There used to be one additional planet. This additional planet was, of course, what would be planet 14. And it is a planet that existed between Mars and Jupiter. This particular planet was known as the Yellow Planet. In some groups, they refer to this planet as Tiamat. But the civilizations of Tiamat fell into a state of degeneration very similar to the one that we are experiencing on Earth today. And based on legends, the Gnostic teaching, what comes to us from the ancient writings of other religions, it states that they destroyed themselves. And in a nuclear catastrophe, the planet was decimated. And the remnants of that planet are what is known today as the asteroid belt that exists within this particular area of the solar system. So here we have our solar system. These are not rocks. These are not just clouds of planets, planets that are essentially made of gas that are orbiting the sun. Each one of these planets is the body of an organism. It is just that the body looks different because it exists in a realm of creation that is dramatically different than when we are. And each one of these organisms has its own soul, or perhaps we should refer to as its own archetype. When we look at planet Earth, well, planet Earth has its own archetype, and the soul of planet Earth is that great master, Melchizedek. Here on Earth, on this organism, we exist today as the 7th subrace of the 5th great race. And every planet is responsible of giving birth to 7 specific races. And now that we are in this 7th subrace, well, that 7 comes to indicate that we are at the end of a cycle. There is no more beyond what we have today. And the only way to drive continuity is to take the very best of what exists today so that it can be used as a seed for the next big race. That next big race would be the 6th race, and that is anticipated that the name of that race will be the Koradi race. Their characteristics will be different than ours, just like we are different from the Atlanteans that were creatures of 9 or 12 feet tall, and just like the Atlanteans were different from the Lemurians who were creatures of 15, 20 feet tall, beings who were able to live 12, 15 centuries. Atlanteans, they used to live 6, 7, 800, 900 years. Today, we are in a situation where the average age is 75. Depending on where you are in the world, it could be less than that, it could be perhaps a little more. But as we continue moving forward and then that next race comes, we can anticipate that race to be smaller in stature. Bodies that are smaller, that demand less of the resources of the planet. Creatures that, as a consequence of being smaller, well, the lifespan could be of perhaps half of the lifespan that we are experiencing today. But the situation is that today we are extremely perverse. Our civilization is not like the civilizations of other planets. People may say, what do you mean other planets? We have a rover in Mars and we haven't seen a building, we haven't seen a car, we haven't seen people. But any consideration like that would be just emphasizing the false belief that things only exist within this third dimension where we have depth and height and width. There are superior dimensions of nature that you have already experienced. Like every time that you find yourself in the dream state, well, that is not just a fantasy. It is not just an artifice of the mind. That is an unfoldment of your soul and penetrating into the fifth dimension of nature where you are governed by less laws. A place where you can also become conscious. A place where if you work arduously in the magic of the super dynamic of love, it will give you the opportunity to not only transform yourself, but to create the necessary body to exist within that dimension the same way that you exist in this one with your own physical body. But here in our planet, we find ourselves today in this deep state of degeneration. In our ignorance, not only we are creating an imbalance with nature, but we are severely harming the planet. And today, there are thousands of divine intelligences that are actively exercising miracles so that we can stay here and that we can live here. Many people enjoy those videos that appear in social media where people claim that we are living in the Matrix and that they have been so fortunate to catch what they refer to as a glitch in the Matrix, where somebody walks in and they appear out of nowhere. You see? Videos where you see that there are two individuals walking and there is this shadow that leaves one body, and as it leaves the body shakes like what happened, and it penetrates into another body. So people say that that's another glitch. There are many divine intelligences that are doing everything that they can so that we can live here, so that we can receive a wisdom that we can apply and that can help transform ourselves. And the genie of the earth, this cosmo creator that is known as a deva of nature, a god of nature, which is Melchizedek, well, he governs the planet. Just like he governs the planet, there are lesser gods that are known as pennant gods that govern nations. Within the nations that we have states and cities, there are lesser gods, let's refer to them as angels, that have an influence over each one of those cities, over the forests, the deserts, the rivers, the oceans. And our ancestors knew this very well. The collective in the collective subconsciousness of our ancestors, and let's say our grandparents and our great-grandparents, well, they knew that every time you went into a town, as the church was built at the very center of the town, well, there was the church as the place where you have the opportunity of receiving a future life. And next to the church, well, there was a cemetery where you knew that that's where your physical life ended. But the churches were not just thrown there as a building of brick and mortar. Every church was dedicated to a special saint. And these so-called saints, well, these are the pennant gods. These angels that oversee all of these activities that happen in the town. And even at the home, the angels of the department of the apple trees, when we will learn about this when we work with elemental magic in our intermediate level studies, the angels of the apple trees govern the homes of every family. And it is a beautiful magic because whenever situations may get a little difficult, there is elemental magic that can be done to ask for the help of this angel that oversees the family, to help bring harmony, to help see underlying problems to finally emerge so that they can be truly addressed. But anyway, Melchizedek governs the planet, and he is a great master. He is a great initiate. Whenever the Earth is seen from other planets, it shines in the sky as a beautiful blue star. And the influence of Earth in other civilizations, in other planets, just as the influence that we get from Mars and the influence that we get from Venus and Mercury, etc., well, other planets get that influence, and the influence that they get from Earth is that of the highest spirituality. It moves the longing of other beings so that they can dedicate themselves to making a transition, of creating the right soul, of crystallizing that soul or radiant soul that is necessary so that the innermost, our spirit, can dress itself with those beautiful garments. And our Earth, well, it has a satellite. The satellite of the Earth is the moon. And the moon also has its archetype. The moon also has its own soul. That soul is Archangel Gabriel. And the moon governs everything that has to do with mechanicity. The moon governs everything that has to do with fluids and transactions of fluids. And we already heard, well, the Earth has this moon that we know about, and it also has that smaller, lesser moon that is a black moon called Lilith. But we are so fortunate that that moon is so small that its vibrations are imperceptible. That does not mean that we are not affected by the forces of Lilith and Nahema that are inferior creatures that have a lot to do with infrasexuality and our cruel lust, etc. But speaking about Archangel Gabriel, well, it influences the earth in such a way that our grandparents and great-grandparents relied on the stages of the moon to know when to plant trees, when to collect the harvests, when to even cut down trees to get the best possible quality of wood. And it was Archangel Gabriel, the one who influenced that great event that is called the Annunciation. He is the one who presented himself before Mary, and he told her, you're very fortunate. You're going to be having a child, and this child is going to create a lot of havoc that is going to be really good. And as Gabriel did this, well, he spoke to Mary because Mary, as a great master and an initiate, well, she knew about the revolutionary practices of Kriya Shakti. But he is the one who makes the Annunciation because Mary maintained her virginity at the time of that conception. And all of those conceptions that take place through the intervention of great masters, conceptions that happen because of the practice of the super dynamic of love, they are all conceptions that are created, generated by the Holy Spirit. So we have then the influence of the moon in everything that we do. It influences our thoughts, it influences our actions, it influences the fluids in our body, and because it influences the fluids in our body and the balances of hormones, well, it influences our thoughts as a side effect, and it influences our actions. And everyone knows about the influences of the moon. Teachers know very well that when we have a full moon, well, the classroom may get a little bit more challenging. Nurses and doctors who work in ERs, they know that those nights can get very busy. And what can we say about those who work in mental hospitals? It is in those nights of the full moon where people, well, they need the most attention. They need the most care. And we can benefit from learning about the phases of the moon, because when we use these cosmic forces in a way that is intelligent, well, we can then apply those forces in our projects and see our projects initiate with the right impulse and be sustained with the right forces and to materialize into good successes. Then we have the planet Mercury. And Mercury is governed by the archetype known as Archangel Raphael. Gabriel is the hero of God, while Raphael is the wisdom of God. And Mercury influences everything that has to do with our intellect, with medicine, with healings, with newscasts. Raphael, as the wisdom of God, walks with us at a specific stage in our lives, specifically between the ages of 7 and 14, which happens to be the age at which we start going to school, a time in which we are like a dry sponge, ready to absorb as much wisdom as we possibly can. And then in our solar system, we also have Venus. Venus, ruled by Archangel Uriel. Uriel is the influence behind love and harmony, family, magnetism, affinity. Uriel is the love of God. And the primary characteristic of Uriel manifests as the gentleness, the kindness of the woman. Some people hear the name Anael, so some people hear the name Uriel and they say, are they different? Are they the same? If you take Uriel as Anael, you're not making any mistake. Making no mistake. The sun, as the core of our solar system, well, the sun also has its own soul. And the soul of the sun is Archangel Michael. And here, Michael, that means whom could manifest like God. Well, we have to learn to make use of these forces of Michael so that we can settle and we can set our posture, our position under the sun. We have to learn to be like the sun is to the planets. Well, in such a way, our heart should be capable of irradiating light and bring about the same comfort, the same security, the same safety, the same growth and development to everyone who surrounds us. And Rudolf Steiner, in terms of contemplating the sun, he made the mistake of stating that the sun was just not there. That what truly existed was a congregation of divine beings that irradiated so much light that what we received here was just the radiance from those gods, from those beings. And that if we had the opportunity of traveling in that direction, when we got there, we would come to see that there was nothing but just these great beings. But Steiner was incorrect about that, because, well, certainly science has clearly demonstrated that that was just an incorrect perception. But this energy that comes to us from the sun, as we receive it in our atmosphere then becomes the instrument that transforms the impression of the sun. Just like we transform the impressions that get to our senses, the organism that is Earth, as it receives the impression of the sun, it transforms that energy into light and heat and color and sound. George Lakhovsky decided to study the sunspots. And he noticed that at times where sunspots, these specific areas of the sun that were very active, that would have explosions called coronas. These coronas would liberate a tremendous amount of cosmic energy, coronas that would liberate a tremendous amount of electrically charged particles, well, those particles would create an impact in the psyche of human beings. And in periods where we were seeing that there was a lot of solar activity, where sunspots were very aggressive, well, the same thing happened with the psyche of human beings on planet Earth. And as he noticed that correlation, then we come to see that it is easier to understand not only how the energies of the sun and the moon and the planets influence the psyche of man, that beyond the solar system, there are other bodies with their own energy and their own electromagnetic fields that have the ability to affect the psyche of the beings on Earth. And we have come all this way speaking about these things so that we can make very clear what is this cosmic law of Solioonensius. Our solar system of Ors is close to a solar system, a neighboring solar system that is known as the solar system of Baleoto. And just like we have Jupiter as this massive celestial body in our solar system, well, Baleoto also has its own great celestial bodies. And in the solar system of Baleoto, there is a comet that orbits that particular sun. This comet is known as the comet Solni. And Solni is so massive that when these two solar systems are at some close proximity, well, as that comet comes in between our solar system of Ors and this solar system of Baleoto, the comet exercises an electromagnetic influence in our own sun, just as it exercises that influence in its own sun of Baleoto. And the strain that it puts in our own sun and in the planets themselves is enough for our psyche to perceive it. Because after all, we are nothing more than condensed energy if we were to look at things in an exceedingly simpler way. The thing with Comet Zolny is that it generates a very intense sense of religion. Let's clarify the idea of religion. We are not speaking about just mystical practices. We are not speaking just about devotional practices and prayers and rituals. We're speaking about religion in terms of reuniting, because religion in its origin comes from a Latin root word called religare, which means to reunite, just like yoga comes from the word yug that means to unite. So it awakens a very intense sense of religion. When we can take this energy and this intense sense of religion is routed in a way that is constructive and harmonious, well, it brings our consciousness closer to the innermost. It allows us to work more aggressively, much more effectively comprehending our psychological aggregates, invoking the power of Kundalini, seeing them being adequately destroyed, more consciousness liberated, and with us creating faster a permanent center of consciousness. But in those who do not use this energy constructively, they will still gravitate towards this intense sense of reuniting. But what will happen is that the reunion will be based on their own values, both the positive and the negative ones. And suddenly we will see how is it that situations like what we experience these days become possible. Things that would otherwise be unexplainable now become crystal clear. Because suddenly, moved by this intense sense of religion, of reuniting, we see how easy it is for people to embrace a false messiah. We see how easy it is for people just to congregate around ideas that may be entirely sterile. everyone experiences a deep longing for self-realization. Those who take this energy constructively, yes, they can make tremendous progress in that vertical path into higher levels of being. But everyone who does not, they reunite with those who share their same positive and negative values, and they seek to manifest a revolution. That revolution, well, rather than being a revolution of the consciousness, that is the third factor it's part of the three factors of the revolution of the consciousness, a sacrifice for humanity. This revolution of the consciousness that is made up of these three factors, birth and death and sacrifice for others, well, they seek a revolution that is external. And in the sense of reuniting, in the sense of materializing self-realization as a new state of beingness, not as new state of being, we see the emergence of war and conflicts. We see the polarization of minds into ideas that can be of many different flavors. These days, the most prevalent ones are, of course, political. And what we see in these days is not that different than what happened back in 1917 with the Bolshevik Revolution. Interesting enough just to observe the current dynamic of the planet and see that 100 years ago, 100 or so years ago, we saw this very same revolution in the same area of the planet, and today we're seeing a conflict in ways that are entirely similar. But also, we see the compounded effect of many other minds who have not embraced the opportunity to take these energies and internalize them, and invite a revolution that can be applied internally. And then the conflict and the intolerance and the impatience. That is the cosmic law of Solioonensius. It is that influence that happens from those bodies that exist within and outside of our solar system. But more specific, the influence of comets only. We left a couple of planets that we did not discuss, and of course we have the planet Mars. And planet Mars has its own soul. The soul of Mars is known as Archangel Samael. And Samael is the justice of God. Mars influences anything that has to do with action, with conflict, with war. And yes, the influences of Mars are very fiery in nature. But when we use that fire in a way that's constructive, it can transform us. When we use it in ways that are irresponsible, well, certainly it can burn us. Beyond Mars, we have the influence of the planet Jupiter. And the soul of Jupiter is Archangel Zachariel. Zachariel is a complex name. It can mean the mind of God. But it can also mean the great man who guards the well of the wisdom of God. And Zachariel, well, he influences everything that has to do with responsibility. He influences everything that has to do with our due processes, internally and externally. And last, we have the influence of Saturn. Saturn is the Ancient of Days. Saturn is, the soul of Saturn is Archangel Orifiel. And Orifiel is the angel of death. Certainly all those hierarchies are responsible, well, for the severance, the cutting of the thread of Antakarana at the time when the physical body ceases to operate. But also, Orifiel and his hierarchies can help us understand the processes of death as they correspond with an internal transformation. The death of our psychological aggregates for the awakening of the consciousness. And this is what we wanted to share with you tonight. The material tonight comes from a few lectures and a few books of Samael. It comes from the writings on his esoteric treatise of Hermetic astrology, from his writings on the book The Color of the Buddha, and his lecture titled The Truth About the Sun. So dear friends, this has been tonight, the Sun, the Universe, and the Solioonensius. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening, and may all beings be happy.